saying goodbye. Sitting in the cockpit for the landing. And shortly to turn right base to land here, possibly on the grass, or possibly be on the grass, because we've got the Catalina backtracking the runway. I assume that was Vic Norman landing. He'll be very proud of that touchdown. That was absolute beauty on our bumpy old grass. Here comes the second steerman. Notice the side slip. Now this is not only to lose height. There go the blades, featuring towards the end of today's show. Well, this aircraft is also very appropriate for that. It was conceived for the US Navy, and although it went on to serve with very many other air arms, including our own Royal Air Force, it was for a US Navy requirement that it was designed. Specifically, the need for a new patrol bomber to counter the potential Japanese threat in the Pacific. It was developed in advance of the impending war, and that was just as well, because it went on to serve valiantly in almost all theatres. As you can see, this is of course an amphibian with a wheeled undercarriage powering up to take off now. The consolidated PBY 5A, Catalina. What an absolutely tremendous sound from the two Pratt & Whitney Twin Wasp radials, about 1,200 horsepower each. Powering into the air, this Catalina, operated by Plain Sailing, another of the operators based at the IWM airfield at Duxford in Cambridgeshire. In fact, it's owned by a syndicate of owners, all of whom enjoy, on occasion, those with display authorisations flying the aircraft in air shows, and indeed it gets around the circuit very impressively, but also taking what one might call long touring flights in the aircraft. Of course, the exploits of Catalinas during the war years were legion. It was US Navy PBYs who sighted the Japanese fleet making towards Midway prior to the battle there, and saved the Royal Navy fleet in the Indian Ocean. This aircraft type was crucial for the Royal Air Force during the Battle of the Atlantic in terms of bridging the so-called U-boat gap, an area of the North Atlantic in which German submarines were able to roam almost at will, supported by Focke-Wulf FW-200 Condor long-range maritime aircraft. that area being out of range of existing land-based types and posing at the time a severe threat to the vital supply convoys that transited across the North Atlantic. Well, the Catalina changed all that. It entered Royal Air Force service in 1941, and that May came their first major action when RAF Catalinas saw the location of the German battleship Bismarck. Of number 210 Squadron, the other, a member of the Royal Canadian Air Force, in fact, Flight Lieutenant David Hornell, who was with number 162 Squadron, both of whom pressed home attacks in Catalinas against U-boats while under extremely heavy fire. There you can see the wingtip mounted floats coming down. If they don't deploy as planned, they can be wound down by hand. And that, I gather, is quite an exertion. Also, as the aircraft flew past on that pass, you might have seen the nose arc carried by the aeroplane with the name Miss Pickup. That was the name carried by a US Army Air Force Rescue Catalina, an OA-10A variant as it was known, based at Halesworth in Suffolk in early 1945. Its unit was part of the US 8th Air Force, the famous Mighty 8th, and its role rescuing downed aircrew in the North Sea. In fact, the original aircraft that bore that name and nose art was lost in May 1945 while attempting to rescue in March 1945, while attempting to rescue the pilot of a P-51 Mustang that had been ditched. The Catalina suffered engine problems, it drifted all night, and in fact eventually fell victim to the guns of a Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter. That caused the crew to abandon the Catalina. They took to dinghies. That was on the 31st of March. They weren't rescued successfully, I might add, until the 4th of April. In fact, if you go to the flying programme here, we were to have seen this in the static display only, but unfortunately the Royal Navy Historic Flight Swordfish is unable to be with us, so the Catalina was drafted into the flying display, and I know that it's open to view while it's on the ground for a small fee, so do make your way over to the Catalina, and the crew from Plain Sailing will be only too happy to welcome you, and I'm sure sell you a souvenir as well.